cinematic romance to the young and restless, but for Stanley Roper, it only signaled another evening of impending headaches. The year was 1977, and the air in Los Angeles was a heavy cocktail of ocean salt, gasoline exhaust, and the lingering, omnipresent scent of coconut-scented suntan oil. Inside apartment 101, the decor was a monument to a decade that style had seemingly abandoned. Stanley sat in his sagging armchair, his body molded into the cushions by years of stubborn residence. The floral patterns of the upholstery shades of burnt orange, muddy brown, and a particularly aggressive mustard yellow clashed violently with the heavy, lemon-scented curtains that Helen had chosen during a particularly misguided shopping spree at the local Sears. Stanley's fingers fumbled with a newspaper, the Los Angeles Times. He wasn't actually reading the headlines about the energy crisis or the latest political scandals. His mind was a fortress of domestic suspicion and property management anxieties. His ears, honed by decades of landlordship to detect the slightest breach of the piece of running faucet, a heavy footstep, or an unauthorized overnight guest, were currently tuned to a sharp, rhythmic sound coming from the sofa. Scritch, scratch, scritch. Be quiet, Helen, Stanley barked, his voice like gravel in a blender. He didn't look up from the sports page, though he had been staring at the same box score for 10 minutes. You're gonna wake Karen. She needs a rest. New York is 3 hours ahead. You know, her biological clock is probably spinning like a top. Helen Roper didn't even pause her manicure. Clad in a vibrant, flowing caftan that featured more geometric shapes and neon colors than a psychedelic rock poster, she was a woman whose unfulfilled desires were as loud as her jewelry. Her layered necklaces, beads, gold-plated chains, and an oversized turquoise pendant clinked with every movement, a metallic percussion that underscored her perpetual boredom. Filing my nails is gonna wake up your knees? Helen countered, her voice dripping with a weariness that only 20 years of marriage to a man who considered a walk to the mailbox an expedition could produce. It's not the filing, Stanley, it's the breaking. Every time you break a nail, you swear loud enough to wake the dead. Oh, so that's what got you up. I thought it was the scent of a missed rent payment, or perhaps the rare thrill of a thought passing through your head. Stanley grumbled, shifting his weight. The springs in his chair groaned in sympathy. Just hold it down, will you? She flew in all the way from New York, and the girl is exhausted. You've heard of jet lag, haven't you? It's a scientific condition. It's like being hungover without the fun of the gin. Ellen rolled her eyes, the blue shadow on her lids shimmering in the dim lamplight. Heard of it? I married it. You've been in a permanent state of jet lag since the Eisenhower administration. And as for Karen, she isn't adjusting to a new time zone. She's trying to adjust to living the life of a cloistered nun. You never let her out of your sight. You're more like her jailer than her uncle. We're in California. Stanley, People come here to be free, not to be locked in a room with a man who thinks the 1940s were just yesterday." Stanley bristled, his sense of duty swelling beneath his ribbed undershirt. He had promised his brother that he would be the iron gate protecting Karen from the freaks, weirdos, and perverts that he believed infested the streets of California like a plague of locusts. To Stanley, L.A. was a sprawling circus of moral decay, a place where people wore shirts unbuttoned to their navels and talked about finding themselves in hot tubs. He was the only thing standing between his niece and a life of utter ruin. "That's ridiculous," Stanley countered, finally dropping the paper. "The girl is having a magnificent time. Didn't I take her to Disneyland? Didn't I spend for hours at the museum looking at things that were older and crustier than I am? Didn't I walk her all the way to the end of the Santa Monica Pier until my bunions throbbed? I even spend every evening regaling her with my experiences in the war. Real history. Helen, tales of valor and canned rations." Helen stared at him, her expression flatter than a pancake. "Stanley, I must have drifted off just hearing you list those things. The girl is young, vibrant, and trapped. She should be out dating, meeting people who don't remember the big band era. She should be dancing at a disco, not listening to you explain the mechanics of a Sherman tank. Dating." Stanley shuddered as if a cold draft had hit his neck. "In this city, it's crawling with perverts. Men with mustaches and gold chains who probably don't even own a tie. No, she's safe right where I can see her. I wasn't talking about your friends, Stanley," Helen quipped, her eyes flashing with a rare spark of amusement. The conversation naturally drifted as it always did to the trio living directly above them in apartment 201. There was Jean Elwood, the sensible florist with the short, dark hair and the no-nonsense attitude that kept the household from spinning off its axis. Chrissy Snow, the bubbly, often bewildered secretary whose blonde ponytail seemed to have a life of its own, and Jack Tripper, the culinary student with the nimble fingers and the even nimbler tongue. Stanley had a very specific and entirely delusional understanding of Jack Tripper. To Stanley, Jack was harmless. He was one of the girls, a man who shared an apartment with two beautiful women only because his interests supposedly lay elsewhere. It was a delicate lie that Jack maintained with the skill of a high-wire artist, knowing that if Stanley ever suspected he was a red-blooded heterosexual, he'd be out on the street faster than a bad check. "Why don't you let her meet the kids upstairs?" Helen suggested, her tone turning uncharacteristically helpful. "The Andrews sisters, Patty, Maxine, and what's his name? Tinkerbell." Stanley's eyes lit up. A smart idea had finally managed to pierce the fog of his skepticism. If Jack took Karen out, she'd be perfectly safe. In Stanley's estimation, a date with Jack Tripper was about as dangerous as a trip to the library with a golden retriever. "Wait a minute," Stanley said, his brain gears turning with a visible effort. You might actually be onto something. Helen, put a mark on the calendar. For once in your life, you've got a smart idea. If she goes out with Jack, it's like sending